Hello, brothers, back again. This time to do a part 2 of the Ciara and Russell Wilson debate going on inside the manosphere. As always, inside the black manosphere and amongst the gender divide that's going on in the black community, we have the two sides lining up almost lockstep, with the black women siding with Ciara for the most part, and to some degree with Russell Wilson, and the black men on the other side staunchly against the union for what it represents. As I said in my last video, the Ciara Wilson combo, or so-called liaison, is a hood rat Cinderella story that black women seem to relish. Redemption for the baby mama after making her mistake with sleeping with bad boys and thugs, as we would like to call them. Now, to me, this story is not particularly controversial or interesting, because there's a lot of black athletes that have made worse choices as far as mating and marrying, creating baby mamas of their own. So I've been more than a bit perplexed about why the black men are taking such umbrage to Russell Wilson doing a lot of what black athletes have been doing for years. There's a lot of black athletes that got babies by strippers. There's a lot of black athletes that are broke because they're paying off child support bills from baby mamas. So why is this story about Russell Wilson hooking up with Ciara so bothering to black men, and also so joyous to black women? I think it's for whatever reason Russell Wilson represents the nice guy, the good guy. He's not out there banging strippers. He's not seeding the United States with babies. You don't see him hanging out at stripper bars making it rain. Comes from a 2-parent household. Speaks the King's English very well. A college graduate and all that. So he would be classified, even though he's an athlete and would be considered an alpha male, the top tier educated lame, the representative of the nerd culture back in high school and maybe even college. Even though he had girlfriends in high school and he was the all-state quarterback, which would tend to not hold to that particular narrative. But that being said, I decided to take another look at it and analyze not the situation, but analyze the reasons for the emotion on both sides behind it. Why does the Russell Wilson Ciara story invoke such heated emotion and passion in the black community on both sides? Why do the black women consider Ciara as the fallen angel and Russell Wilson the redemptive savior? That white knight in shining armor that picks up the so-called damsel in distress after the thug has thrown her in the mud. Why do black men consider Ciara a hoe and a slut and a low-class hoochie mama that made the mistake that a lot of black girls in her position make by sleeping with the rapper Bad Boy? And Russell Wilson playing the role of a Captain Save-A-Ho, swooping in like a super simp and rescuing this baby mama from her fate, thus selling out all the good men that he represents. So after looking at a lot of these videos and hearing the discussion from both sides and being fairly neutral about the subject one way or the other, I decided that I was going to look at it from a different angle. I was going to look at it from more the MGTOW angle, the red pill angle. And we're going to look deeper into the social sexual dynamics that the sexual market value or sexual marketplace holds, and why that emotion rises up amongst the men and the women. This is going to be my particular interpretation of it, and we're going to do this not from moral place or a morality place or who's right and wrong, but simply from the sexual marketplace and the sexual market economics that the red pill and game shows about this particular kind of relationship. When we do it that way, it becomes a little clearer, not the end all and be all answer to everything, but a little bit clearer. So we're going to do this Black Gnostic style. We're going to bring in a little red pill language. We're going to bring in some charts. We're going to look at it from a neutral, pragmatic point. I'm not going to take sides. We're going to do it in a cold, calculating manner and see why the emotion from both sides makes sense from their perspective and from their own particular biological value system. Because when I thought of it that way, it made perfect sense. It made perfect sense from both sides. And men and women were reacting exactly as these particular red pill charts and diagrams say that they should and say that they would. It's about maximizing their position from their biological standpoint. So this is the intro, and we're going to get into it. I don't know how many parts it's going to take. Hopefully just one. Hopefully just one. And, you know, if the people looking at this will stay to the end, we may be able to shed a little bit of light on this. Like a great philosopher once said, don't curse the darkness, light a candle. Now, to start off, we have to get some of the basics out of the way. We have to set a baseline of what makes men and women attractive to each other based on their own biological makeup and their own biological needs. What makes a woman attractive to a man is far more simple than what makes a man attractive to a woman. Women are attractive to a man based primarily on her looks, her youth, and her beauty, because basically she's a vessel for a man's seed. So his biological urge, his biological is filtered through the way she looks, her youth, and her beauty. Her loyalty, virtue, and personality do factor in, but at a lesser level. So that can be represented by the attractiveness scale with a 10 on the top, which is stunning, all the way down to the grotesque, which is a 1. And where women lie within that scale is different for each man. Now, what makes a man attracted to a woman is far more complex because her needs are more complex. Her biological imperative is to find material and ensure the survivability of her offspring. So what she needs from a man is more than just genetic material. So women follow what the red pill guys call a hypergamous strategy. Hypergamy is the strategy, but what are the goals? There are 3 impulses which drive women to do what they do. The first is have sex with the best available male. The purpose of this is so that her children have the best genetics possible and thus the best chance of surviving and thriving. The second is protection. Women and their children need protection from hostile males and from natural threats. Women want a man who will keep her safe and, even more important, make her feel safe. And the third is provision. A woman wants a man who will be able to provide for her and her children. The more resources available to her and her children, the healthier they will be and the better their chance of survival. So whereas a man needs the best vessel for his seed, his offspring, which is represented in her physicality or her looks, youth, and beauty, a woman's imperative is far more complex because she needs more. This scale was developed for men by Donald Graham. He calls it the lamp scale. And his 5 factors are looks, athleticism, which come under appearance, which is genetics, personality, which is power, the man's ability to protect and also provide within an environment. And the last 2 are money and status, which could be described as resources and influence. As we call it in the Black community, swag. Now, turd flinging monkey on the MGTOW channels simplified this particular scale into 4 and ranked them. He ranked them for more of a post-industrial society that we live in. Now, his 4 are wealth, looks, attitude, and personality. Wealth for resources. Looks is obvious, which is genetics. Attitude, which confers status and power. And the last one is personality. And for the women, it was youth, beauty, virtue or loyalty, and then the last one was personality. So for this exercise, we're going to use TFM scale rather than Donald Graham's, because for our case, I think it's a little bit more simpler and more accurate for what we're getting ready to talk about. Now, before we continue, there's one more definition that I have to give you because of the next chart I'm actually going to use. That's the definition of the beta provider or beta retention scale factors that you're going to see on the next chart. And those factors are provider provisioning, industriousness, fidelity, loyalty, affection, affability, or friendliness that are desirable traits with women as far as a beta provider, or what we call a good guy. Now, this chart that we see here is also supplied by Donald Graham, who has done a lot of good work as far as describing and defining male attractiveness. We have 2 scales in the XY axis. Now, on the x-axis, from -10 to a +10 goes from the mostly invisible on the attractiveness scale all the way up to the hot bad boy, which is a +10 on the attractiveness scale. And on the vertical axis, or the y-axis scale, we have the mostly invisible or the useless guy at the bottom, along with the bad boy or the cad at the bottom that don't have any of the retention attributes, all the way up to the beta orbiter or the friend, the guy that gets put in the friend zone, and the ideal man, which is the combination of the attractive bad boy and the beta provisioner. Now, as Mr. Graham says, this is not a hard-coded. All men have a mixture of these 4 along the scale somewhere. And the scales are only a matter of degrees. Where all women are looking for the ideal man in blue in the upper quadrant, women like men make compromises depending on their circumstances and what they actually need. It also varies in a woman's stage of life, where women desire the opposite of what you see, whereas the mostly invisible guy no woman really wants, and her ideal man is the opposite of that, which is a woman's dream guy. The same thing can be said about the bad boy and the beta orbiter. When a woman is young and hot and has a need for excitement and adventure, and looks are more important because of the physicality, that the bad boy is what's most desired. Now, as a woman ages and she gets closer to what we call the wall, like in her late 20s or 30s, her desires start to float upward, and it's less about the alpha scale and more about the provisioning scale, which is what the beta orbiter actually provides. So the good guy or the nice guy, the nerd or the educated lame, who's the beta orbiter, when she's young, as she progresses up the chart and she needs provisioning and providing because she needs that for her young, she goes closer to what the beta orbiter provides. She goes up the scale in the provisioning scale and the retention scale. So even though she wants a combination of the two, she's willing to accept less of the bad boy and more of the beta orbiter. And there are some men, although there are few, that do exist outside the scale that become the ideal man and the bad boy at the same time. You know, your drug dealers, rappers, entertainers, athletes that have the swag, have the looks, but also have the provisioning power, the wealth and the status of the ideal man, without the negatives of the beta orbiter. Money, power, status, and swag, and a sense of adventure are powerful lures for young women. Even though it's temporary and they're willing to overlook the negatives that bad boys carry, which is long-term provisioning, loyalty, and personality and morals. So they are the ideal man temporarily until the negatives actually start to kick in. So Ciara's ex, Future, was one of those guys. He was the bad boy provisioner that was so attractive until the negatives started to surface as she got closer to 30. So that horizontal line can almost be a demarcation line, as a woman will drift from the low energy and negatives of the provisioning scale and drift upward. And as she gets closer to 30, she starts to cross that horizontal line and drift upward toward that provisioning scale and either choose her ideal man. If she can't find him, she will usually choose the beta orbiter or the beta male for provisioning, providing, and stability. Just as a side note, the beta male, alpha male thing is normally used in white, red pill circles. For black people, I don't really believe in it. But since it's on the chart, I'm using this chart. That's what I'm using. So listeners out there, if you're what they call an educated lame or an educated good guy, and you don't take offense to it. This is here simply for demonstration. But I think this particular diagram gives an insight to a woman's strategy, the twin mating strategy of what the white people call alpha fucks, which is the bad boy, and the genetic material that he carries, and the beta fucks, the beta bucks, which is the beta orbiter that she looks for afterwards when she's ready to settle down and have a family. So once you really lay this out, women become fairly simple creatures. They are simply following their emotional and their biological imperatives, sometimes not even knowing why. This is not to excuse them, but to simply understand them. So you can see why Ciara made the move that she moved, and why women actually applaud the move that Ciara actually made. To them, emotionally, biologically, and logically, it makes perfect sense to them, and they don't see why men have a problem with it. So, but in the next segment, we're going to show why men actually have a problem with it, because our particular mating strategy is opposite theirs. Now that we've gone through why women like bad boys and thugs when they're young and choose the good guys or the educated lames or whatever they want to call them when they're mature or in their 30s, we're going to focus in on why men, and black men in particular, have a problem with that particular choice, and why black men, especially in their 30s, have a problem with single mothers in their 30s. Let's look at this chart. It's a comparison of 1960 distribution age of first marriages for men and 2011 distribution age of first marriages for men in 2011. The 1960 represents more of an agricultural age for when men married, as opposed to more industrial age when men marry. Now, when the work was heavy and more labor intensive and needed more muscle, a younger man was more preferred as far as provisioning, because a younger man was needed for his youth and his brawn, because that's what earned the most money. As the ages and the economy needed more of a complex knowledge base, and machines took over a lot of the heavy labor, you can see that it actually shifted when a man's most productive years were. So the Industrial Revolution or the advanced economies delinked a man's productivity from his youth. So now that's thrown him out of whack with women. Whereas in 1960, the majority of men married between the ages of 19 and 25, you've seen that curve move out to closer to 30 and flatten out. Man's labor or his productivity is out of sync with a woman's youth and beauty. Now, earlier in this vid, I said that the reason that men find women attractive, or their biological reason for men finding women attractive, is their youth and their beauty. And that directly correlates to them being a vessel and as a carrier for a man's sperm, or carrier of his progeny. So in this chart of the effect of maternal age on natural fertility, you can see a woman's most fertile period is about a little less than 20 years, from age 15 to age 32. And after the age of 32, 33, you can see her fertility rapidly declines to almost nothing past the age of 45. So if we take that and expand upon it, when is a woman's most valuable period or most desirable period in her life for a man? It's between the ages of 15 and 35, right? Past that, she starts to hit her reproductive wall, and her reproductive value, her fertility value, goes down. So a woman's most valuable period in her life, desirable period in her life, is between the ages of 15 and 35. Keep that in mind, because we're going to come back to this later. In this slide, you can see the sexual market value curves that have been made the rounds and been made famous by Rollo Tomasi of The Rational Male. It shows the peak period of the value of men and women. And you can see that peak period of value of a woman corresponds almost precisely with her fertility chart. Also in this chart, you can see that a man's peak value, his most valuable years are after that, coming right at the age of 30 and extending out basically to the age of about 50. And there's reason for that, and we're going to get to that in a little bit. But keep these two charts in mind about the value of women and the value of men, and when those two periods are, because both are approximately about 20 years, but they occur at different stages for different reasons. They both have to do with their biological mission and their biological imperative. There's an old saying from a movie, All the President's Men. And in that movie, Deep Throat was saying that if you want to know and you want to get to the bottom of anything, what do? You follow the money. And that's what this chart actually is going to do. It's going to follow the money. This is a chart of the median usual weekly earnings of full-time wage and salary workers by age and sex in 2012. And is the ages of workers 16 years and older. I want you to focus on the gold bars, which are the men, and look at the progression of earnings throughout their lifetime. And what I wanted you to particularly focus on is their highest 20 years of earnings. In the modern era, a man's highest earning years, or his prime earning years, are between the ages of 35 and 65, or basically between the ages of 35 and 55, with 5 years left over in the cohort is 55 to 64. So in basically the last half of his working life, he's at his peak earning capacity. If you think about the chart about the sexual market value of men, and when the peak is, and when their peak value towards women is, it almost precisely matches this particular chart and its peak earning years. So if you follow the money, you know when men are most valuable to women. If we look back at that sexual market value chart, which was made by Rollo Tomasi and also confirmed by OkCupid, according to their data, a woman's peak value is directly tied to her fertility. Her peak years are between the ages of 15 and 35. A man's peak years is tied to his provisioning, for the most part. And those peak years are between the ages of 35 and 50. OkCupid and Rollo Tomasi says it's 50 instead of 55, as the economic charts are, which is directly tied to his provisioning. So what does that mean? That means that for good guys or male providers, these particular periods don't overlap like they used to back before 1960 or 1970. They are mismatched. So whereas before 1970, they were closer in age, where a man would be getting a woman in his peak years to marry and trading that for provisioning and providing, now that is mismatched. And it goes against a woman's biological imperative. So how does she basically overcome this dilemma where youth and attractiveness, or the alpha male, that when married with the provisioning and providing and stability of the so-called good guy or beta provider, when they don't match? That means she has adopted the modern thing of a twin mating strategy. The alpha fucks when she's younger, dating the bad boys, riding the cock carousel. And then after the age of 30, jumping tracks and trying to latch on to a quote unquote good guy or the provider in his prime years. So basically what women are doing are rigging the game or cheating the game. Her best years are between 15 and 35. And what she's doing is she's hooking up with the bad boys and the quote unquote alpha males, the guys with swag. And then before her window closes, she's trying to jump off that train and jump on to the train of the provider or the educated lames who are now becoming established in their 30s, to take advantage of the provisioning and providing that he has for her old age and for basically her children. So is it no wonder that women in their teens and 20s are having babies by so-called thugs and bad boys, and then later on in their years they're trying to find a so-called good guy or beta male provider to actually grow old with? Now, if she can pull that off, it's the perfect situation. And for a while, I guess she could pull that off if she was attractive enough. If she was an 7 or 8 and above, she could possibly pull that off. She still had enough swag and attractiveness to actually pull in a beta provider before her window closed, even though she had given up basically her actual prime years to somebody that actually wasn't going to provide her the wealth and resources later on in life. It's the same thing with women and the D-boys, the drug dealers, or the rappers, or the entertainers and athletes earlier on in their career. And when those windows actually close on her, then she's ready to jump the tracks. Now, that is the exact opposite of what men are about. Now, before 1970, when work was more matched, she basically traded in her prime for your prime. And later on, she would trade in her prime productive years, her youth and beauty and fertility, in exchange for provisioning later on in life when she got older, and that her window had closed, which was basically a fair deal. You got the best of her in her prime. She got the best of your earnings in your earnings prime. So you can see why educated lames, so to speak, good guys who become established in their careers after they're 30, they get the house, they get the car, they get the high salary and they enter in their prime earning years, why they would be upset that a woman who had given away her prime in her 20s and slept with bad boys and went with drug dealers and rode the cock carousel and had a good time would all of a sudden try to jump the track after her prime was actually over and latch onto you as a provider and a good guy and an established guy who worked hard building up to that. She wants to jump tracks and she wants to take advantage of both sides. She wants to take advantage of your prime when she hasn't given you her best and she hasn't earned it. And Ciara is a representative of that. She's 30. Russell Wilson is 26. So even though he's not yet in the same spot because he's 26, but as an athlete, when is an athlete's prime? An athlete's prime is basically almost the same prime as a woman's prime, when his strength, his youth, and his ability is in his early 20s and his early 30s, and basically his career is almost over when he gets about 35. But the best of Ciara's prime is already gone. Her prime is between 15 and 35. She's 30. She's given away most of her prime years to the bad boys or the thugs, the rappers that were the combination of the bad boys and the beta providers. They had money, they had swag, they had excitement. But the negatives of being with a bad boy that she saw with Future, having a baby and having that man at home to basically provide not only wealth and material, but also stability and morals. She's 30 now. She's looking for that. And why the men are getting upset is because she's cheating the game. She's already invested into bad boys and that kind of lifestyle. And now she's ready to jump tracks and go over to the good guy side and take advantage of another man's prime who isn't like that. So I can understand men thinking that she's cheating. She's had a baby out of wedlock. She's rode the carousel and she's getting with a guy that is the exact opposite of that, who is in his provisioning prime as an athlete. And most guys don't feel that she's worthy or she's earned that. And a lot of guys are upset, especially black men are upset because it encourages women to try to cheat the game. You've invested the best of yourself into something that's negative, and now you want to jump tracks and get with something that's positive when you haven't earned it. If you're in your 30s getting with a man that's already established and you can cheat the game, I can understand. But don't be upset with men that don't like that don't like being cheated, because basically that's what you're doing. You're cheating him. Your prime has already gone. You've already used it up. You've used your youth and beauty capital on somebody else, on negativity. You want to take advantage of his prime to help you raise your offspring. So what Russell Wilson represents for women is the win-win situation. They win when they're younger because they satisfy that imperative to date the alpha male, the bad boy, the guy with swag. And they win on the other side when that alpha male, that swag all plays out and they need provisioning, providing, and stability. And it represents a lose-lose situation for the provider male, the good guy, because all of his hard work to build up to the point where he is in his prime, in his earnings prime, and he wasn't able to take advantage or partake in a woman's youth and beauty and sexual prime. He's actually being cheated. It becomes a lose-lose situation for him. And just because you're the same age doesn't mean anything, because your primes are mismatched. If anything, a man that's in his 30s, his early to mid 30s, should marry a woman that's about 10 to 15 years younger than him, because that's when your primes are actually matched. So now we can understand the divide that black men and black women have about this Russell Wilson situation. It's not that hard to understand when you follow the money. But this video is getting kind of long, so I'm going to close it out. Like, comment, subscribe. I hope this provokes discussion. I hope this is an interesting take that you haven't thought of before. But anyway, it's getting long. I'm going to close this one out. This is BGS signing off, and I'll see you on the next one.